Hey, you here? Hey, that's the question. It means it's time to begin another episode of the Paul Leslie Hour, and we are pleased to present one rare interview with English-Canadian singer-songwriter David Wiffen. David's an exceptional performing and recording artist who released several acclaimed records. His writing and performances are nothing short of, well, I said it already, exceptional. David Wiffen's work has even been recorded by the likes of Anne Murray, Tom Rush, Jerry Jeff Walker, Wylie Hubbard, and many others. Just keep in mind, folks, the Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by viewers and listeners like you. Come on. Be a patron of the spoken word and supporter of independent media. Just visit thepaulleslie.com/support, and we thank you, truly. Well, folks, it's time. Let's start the show with our special guest, David Wiffen.
Well, thank you so much for making the time to do this.
Oh, no problem. Glad to do it.
It's an honor. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to properly introduce everyone out there to who I'm joined with. We are joined with an artist who I've enjoyed for years. He's made some recordings that no doubt many of you have enjoyed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by David Wiffen. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So, can you tell us, what are your earliest memories?
My earliest memories, I think probably about the war when I was about 3. I remember the V-2 rockets going over our house to be dropped on London, and the other thing was going down into the bomb shelter. So we didn't get killed.
And can you tell us the city you were born in?
I was born in London.
In London, England?
Yes.
And what would you say your earliest interest was?
Painting and drawing. And after I learned how, I'm a big reader.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a while before I got the hang of it, I remember.
And what kind of things do you remember reading?
Oh, very wide. I'm very fond of James Lee Burke. I read a lot of Dickens, James Bond, of course, and what else? Here I have a note here. Oh, and also, yes, very importantly, James Michener, who I've read most of his books.
James Michener.
Yes.
And can you tell us a bit about your parents?
Yes, I can. We lived in a place called Forest Hill, which is in the London suburbs. And my father was a major in the Royal Engineers. And I didn't actually meet him until I was about 3, in 45 or so, when he came back from the war. My mother was very angry at him for joining the army. She didn't want to be alone with me, but that worked itself out. It was rather strange meeting him for the first time. I think I said something like, "How do you do, sir?" and went back to sleep. My mother she's a very nice lady. and a homemaker, I guess you'd call it.
Well, tell us a bit about when you started writing, and I mean any kind of writing yourself.
Yes, well, I guess that started in earnest in about 1968. I was with a group at the time, a band called Three's a Crowd, of which there were six of us, which is a whole other story. And we had just finished a 13-week engagement at the World's Fair, Expo 67. And then we did 2 weeks at the Canadian Pavilion. And after we finished, the band unfortunately broke up, as all bands eventually do, I think. And I came back, not to Toronto, where I had been living, but I came back to Ottawa, where I had a lot of musical friends. And one morning, I went down in the basement with my 12-string guitar and came up with More Often Than Not. And that kind of started the ball rolling. I did most of my writing during the 70s and early 80s. And I don't have a great repertoire, but I guess there's 50 or 60 songs, most of which have been recorded. And so, yeah, that's where that came from.
Well, there's certainly some spectacular songs, and
Well, thank you.
yes, sir, and many great singers have resonated with them as well and decided to record them. So, can you tell us about moving to Canada? What was the initial reason, and what was it interesting to be in a new country?
Oh, definitely, yes. What happened was my father had been in Canada for a year. He was working here on a power station project. And instead of coming home, he invited us or instructed us to come over here. And so we hopped on the Empress of Britain and came across the Atlantic by sea and arrived in, I think it was 1958. And it was quite an easy transition. I made a few good friends when I first got here, and but school did not go well for me. I ended up having a very bad occasion in one of my classrooms where I figured that the teacher was kind of picking on me, and I was given the chance by the headmaster either to go home and sort of calm down a bit, and if I wanted to, I could come back. And I said, well, I don't really want to come back. And from there, I went back to England and I worked on a farm, which belonged to a cousin of mine. And I was there for about 18 months, then came back to Canada again. And I had various odd jobs. I worked for one of the premier jewelry and shops or businesses. I also worked at a place that made fur coats at a furrier's, and I had a job for a while with the Ontario government in the retail sales tax department, but sometime later I got not fired, but I was let go because of my night activity at the local folk club. I was staying up until all hours of the night, and one morning I went to work and went to sleep on my desk, and so they let me go too.
So, can you tell us a bit about how you came to be a performer, a live performer?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. On my way home from work, I passed this place that had sort of, red tablecloths or checkered tablecloths and candy bottles in the window. And it really it intrigued me, but I never really did anything about it. It turned out to be the Village Corner Club, which was one of the first sort of folk clubs in Toronto. And one night or one day, a friend of mine said, I went to that place last night where you've been, watching the place, and all the people there are like you. And so he took me down there, and we went in, and there were a lot of people, drinking coffee and playing guitars. And the owner came on the stage and said that the scheduled entertainer for that night couldn't make it. And does anybody do anything? Does anybody sing or play the guitar? And my friend piped up and said, yes, he does. And that's how I got started. I went up there and did a few songs, and everybody liked it. I got some applause, which was very, it was good, and which started off a long-going battle with my parents because they weren't very pleased with the kind of company I was keeping. And but eventually I just gave up my day job, and I lived at the Village Corner for a while on the upstairs, and the people that I was working with at that time included Gordon Lightfoot, Ian and Sylvia, and various other people. And I started my career, and I wrote two songs, I think, while I was there. This was 61, 62, I guess. And so I wrote these two songs, and people seemed to like them. And but I didn't really start writing seriously until I came to Ottawa, like I said.
And the entertainment aspect, the performing aspect of interacting with a crowd, would you say that was something that was natural to you, or was it something you learned?
A bit of both, actually. Yeah, a bit of both. I've always been a bit of a mimic, and I had a few jokes up my sleeve, so I was able to, as well as play the music, I was able to entertain and give them a good time.
And I'm hoping you can tell us. I think you have a very unique voice. It's a very enjoyable. It's a little bit of the what you would think of with some of the folk people, but there's a bit of blues, I think, also. How did you develop your voice?
Well, I had a good start because I learned to sing at school when I was, 13, 14 at high school. And we had a school choir and we had a school band, which I played in. I learned to play the tuba. And, but he taught us, we had a really good music teacher. And he taught us some of the mechanics of singing, how to breathe, and he was a great musician himself. He played trumpet, guitar, piano, and taught us some of the basics of singing, and that's where I first started singing.
Interesting. And I'm hoping you can tell us. There's this record that people can get, and the original copy you can see it for really, really high prices. It's
Yes.
the live record, the Bunk House Coffee House recording. Can you tell us about the circumstances of that recording?
Yes, I can. Originally, the recording was supposed to be what they called in those days a sampler, with 5 or 6 artists singing maybe 2 songs each. And on the day of recording that was supposed to start, we found out that a lot of the other people were supposed to be almost sort of caught in a bad snowstorm. This was out west in Vancouver, and couldn't make it. And so I ended up getting the whole thing, and that's how that record came to be.
Was this repertoire something you had picked up through the years? Just
Yes, it was. I was singing these things like Four Strong Winds of Ian Tyson, um, some folk songs. I was when I was a kid, I had a wind-up record player, gramophone, and he used to play these. They were sort of 7-inch, like a 45 put on vinyl, and I first came across Burl Ives, and I learned a couple of his tunes, and learned songs from, by swapping with other people, and some kind of jam sessions that we had. And one of the other tunes on the record was "Don't Think Twice" by Bob Dylan.
Mule Skinner Blues.
Mule Skinner Blues. Abilene. What else?
Working in the Kitchen.
Oh, Courting in the Kitchen, which is an Irish song.
Since I Fell for You.
And one of my favorite songs, which was a bit of a crooner, called "Since I Fell for You." And my uncle, who lived upstairs from us in London, was a very big very big fan of Nat King Cole. Sorry,
oh yeah,
a while there. And I used to hear his records downstairs when I was a kid, and I was a bit of a crooner, I guess you'd say. I like those kind of songs. I grew up hearing a lot of that kind of music.
First song you wrote on there.
And but I hadn't really started writing my own stuff then, and So it was a hodgepodge of different sort of different kind of songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that I was a big blues fan, and that's really what I wanted to do. But as you probably heard, my voice is somewhat smooth, and is not really suited to blues music. So but I did sing. I learned from records. I had a lot of Brownie and Sonny tunes, and B.B. King, and that was my main sort of direction at that time. And then I remember that Ian and Sylvia had been down to New York and got signed with Albert Grossman, and they came back uh, um, reveling or very. They had heard Bob Dylan down there,
Right.
and they were very impressed by him and said, this guy's going to be the next big thing. And also that the whole idea was to be to do a lot of different stuff, a varied repertoire. And that's when I started to learn from other singers more folk music, traditional stuff. And that became my repertoire from then on.
I'm curious. You know, I have heard the recording you did of Bob Dylan's "Don't Think Twice." Do
Yes.
you know? Did he ever give any reaction or any?
Unfortunately, not. No, I've never met him. I've been very close to him a couple of times. I remember at the Kettle of Fish in New York, which is a place he used to frequent with Jerry Jeff Walker and Tom Rush and Ian Anderson. And I went there one night just thinking that I might come across him. And I was very fond of Jerry Jeff too, Jerry Jeff Walker. But the night that I went, I was only there for a week. I was playing at the downstairs place. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I never did get to meet Bob, but I met a lot of other, Eric Anderson, Tom Rush, and people like that. And we also, at the Village Corner, it was the kind of place that we just sort of kept going until we dropped. We often didn't finish until it was daylight. And so it was the kind of place where after people finished their gigs, they would come over to the Village Corner and jam. And so I met a lot of interesting people there, among them Paul Stuckey from Peter, Paul and Mary, Bob Gibson,
Danny Doherty.
Danny Doherty of Mamas and Papas. Yeah, so we had a good time.
And you've mentioned a number of people there that you've interacted with, but what about your songwriting influences? Who would you say has influenced your writing the most?
Fred Neil and Jerry Jeff. I was a big Fred Neil fan. I went to see him at the Purple Onion in Toronto and just was mesmerized. I'd never heard a voice like that. He was just pretty fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I met Jerry Jeff later on in Ottawa, and we hung out for a while. And I also was very impressed with his repertoire and his style. Picked up a few tips, and he was a big influence.
He was a real character.
Yes, he was. Yes, I had a TV show at the time called "Both Sides Now" from the Joni Mitchell song, and I used to do it with Anne Mordefee. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she later went on to be in musicals and that kind of thing. And anyway, at one taping, she had lost her voice, and it happened to be the taping that I was doing with Jerry Jeff, so I got to do the whole thing with him, and I played him more often than not, which was one of my more popular tunes, and he liked it very much and ended up recording it, which was nice. And I should say I met the thing we lasted for about, I think it was 26 to maybe 30 shows we did, and among the guests I had were Odetta, Eric Anderson, Tom Rush. We even had what's his arm? Oh, I can't think. Oh yes, and we had Chuck Berry.
Wow!
Yeah. He came, and he was a bad guy. He had a habit of picking up a rhythm section instead of having a band with him all the time. He would pick up a rhythm section, bass and drums, from local musicians, and he chose two of my musical friends, a bass player and a drummer, and he was very stickler. He was very stickler for the way the drumming, and he wasn't too pleased with that particular section, and there was a bit of an argument, and but it was a thrill. I mean, to be 5 or 6 feet away from one of the masters was quite thrilling.
Now, I want to jump back to something you were mentioning earlier, that you were a bit of a crooner.
Yes.
Were you in any way influenced by the people like Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of other people. My uncle used to play their records, and this was when I was very young still. I wasn't even in my teens, but and also my father was a big fan of Perry Como, so I saw a lot of him, especially on TV, and yeah, I did. I sort of had an inkling or a desire to do that kind of, sing that kind of music. But I never really got the chance. I just had to stick to blues and folk music.
So, other than yourself, who was the first person to record a David Wiffen song?
Anne-Marie.
I think it was Anne-Marie. I had written a song called "I Don't Want to Drive You Away," which she called David's song, and she recorded it. And I think the next person was
Harry Belafonte.
Harry Belafonte, which was a strange thing. I had a song that I wrote sort of as a joke. It's called "Mr. Wiffen is incommunicado today," and he somehow he was in Toronto and staying at the King Edward Hotel, and for some reason he recorded it on an album called Play Me, and but he changed it to Old Harry. But it was a bit of a feather in my cap, you know. Harry Belafonte was getting up there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, as I say, Jerry Jeff recorded more often than not. Eric Anderson recorded more often than not. Tom Rush recorded Driving Wheel, from which many people have recorded that song, and I noticed that there are a few word changes in Tom Rush's version, and I noticed that most of the covers tend towards his interpretation of the song, and not so much mine. He changed a few words here and there, and I noticed that most of the people that recorded it must have done his version from listening to the lyrics. And there are, I can't really tell you how many people recorded Driving Wheel. They're in the teens and 20s. It's been among them was Roger McGuinn from the Byrds, and I think Bob Dylan mentioned it in his.
I don't know what that's.
I don't know what the record was called. It was quite recent, and in one of his songs, he mentions "Listen to Driving Wheel," which is kind of made me very pleased.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned some singers here, especially, Anne Murray is just one of the best singers who's ever been.
Yeah.
Would you say of these different versions that singers have recorded, covers of your work, is there a favorite version someone did of a David Wiffen song?
I think I'd have to say Jerry Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
When he sang More Often Than Not. It's a really nice version. Oh, Tom Rush and Eric Anderson. That was nice because it's very flattering, among other things, when other writers record your songs. It really is a good feeling. It's very makes you feel good, especially if it's Eric and Tom. You know, that's getting pretty good.
Yeah, definitely.
Very.
Who, in your experiences, has been the nicest person you've met in the music business?
Well, Joanne and I we've talked that over, and I think I came up with I have to say Sonny Terry was one of the greatest people I ever met. He was a happy guy, you know. He was always in a good mood and very funny. And I spent quite a lot of time with them, with Brownie and Sonny, at the Riverboat in Toronto. And and in Vancouver, they played the Bunk House quite a bit. So I would hang out with him when they came to town. But he was there's nobody like him, or there wasn't anybody like him. He was just a great guy to be around, very joyful.
There are some of your songs that to this very day you can find people discussing online.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And there's a couple I feel I just must ask about them, and not only for my own curiosity, but also for everyone out there who's in conversation. What inspired the song "Coast to Coast"?
Uh, traveling in Canada on what we used to call in the early days the almost non-existent Canadian tour, which consisted pretty well of about 5 cities. And you found yourself, going from Toronto, we'd play in Winnipeg, Calgary, Saskatoon, Regina, and then out to the West Coast. And I ended up there in Vancouver, where I spent 2 or 3 years and met a lot of people. That was during the Bunk House years. Met a lot of good people.
And what about the song "Driving Wheel"?
That's, I would say, it's purely fictional. It just came to me that I always liked that the song "The Midnight Special," and it just happened to be a nice line to put in there. That, but it was fictional. I've never been to Texas, but because of Jerry Jeff and who is or was a Texan, and with whom I spent a lot of time, it just was a good line. I liked it, and that's how it came about.
Well, someone I am a fan of, David Bromberg, he recorded that song "Driving Wheel."
Yeah,
What did you
yeah.
think of his interpretation?
I just listened to it very recently. I'd never heard his version before, and I really liked it. It was a very good version. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Someone that you've worked with is Mr. Bruce Coburn, who was
Yes.
a guest on this show. What is it like working with a guy like Bruce Coburn?
Oh, he's very knowledgeable. He's a great musician. We made Coast to Coast Fever together, which was a pleasure. It was very, very easily done. We never had we got along well, and the sessions went very well. But he's what I would call a master. His guitar playing is phenomenal. He's got a good voice, and his songs are amazing. And I spend a lot of time with Bruce, and we got along very well.
Is there a song of yours that you feel is the best?
Yeah, it's there's one on. I made a record. The last one, I guess that I ever did was. I called it "Songs from the Lost and Found" because for a long time the masters were actually lost, and they turned up several years later, and there was a song on there called "The Ballad of the Inland Sailors," which I think is probably one of the best songs I've ever written. And I guess more often than not it's the song that I'm known for. As soon as I start the chords, people start applauding, so that's nice.
Has there been an honor that has meant the most to you?
Oh, an honor, yes. Well, I've had two. What do you say? What's the word? I always forget. For what they did.
Oh, benefit.
Yes, they. I've had two collections of musicians who have done tribute. That's the word I was looking for, and it's really it's really a nice thing to hear, as I say, other artists play your music and sing your music. And I've had a couple of those, one in Ottawa here where we used local musicians, um, and also one at Hughes Room in Toronto with the Cowboy Junkies, Murray McLaughlin, Tom Wilson, and others. I can't remember them all. And so that was a very nice thing to happen, both of them. And we had a big room was packed, which was a good thing too.
Yeah. What has surprised you the most about your life?
Oh yes, I have to say that I just turned 80 this year, which I blew my mind. Actually, I never expected to live that long, so that's nice.
Who would you say David Wiffen is at heart? Who is David Wiffen?
It's a hard one. Oh yes, well, I've had several interruptions in my career. I got married um, in the early '80s, and there was a child involved, so I had to get a real job, and I was out of circulation for about a year and a half, and learning to put the food on the table, and well, just a happy guy at the. There's been a lot of sadness in my life, especially in earlier years. I had a bit of a problem with alcohol, as it seems most of us do in this business. Um, uh, but I've been sober for about 35 years.
Wow.
So that's not a problem anymore. And I was very lucky in love. I've been married to my wife now for
35 years.
35 or 36 years, and we're still in love. And it's been a really good time for me. Joanne, my rock.
You said Joanne is your rock?
Yes.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
For everything. Now, I know that you're a poet, and I'm wondering if, in closing, perhaps there was a poem you'd like to read or recite.
Well, I have one here. I don't. I have written poetry, but nothing that I would really want to read. But throughout my early life, I had I guess what I would call my best friend, which is a guy called William Hawkins, who wrote Gnostic Serenade and Cotton Candy Man, which were on the Three's a Crowd album. And this is one of his poems, with my favorite. which is called The Warner Mystique, about a lady friend of his, which says, pause in front of light as it falls off the bulb onto us and marvel. Thus it is with light, and I would have it be with me, falling on you from all possible angles. Full stop. Nice, eh?
Very lovely. Very nice. Do you have any idea how much enjoyment and fascination and pleasure people have gotten from your music through the years?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm very aware of it. There's been quite a lot of stuff online which I get to read, and one of the things that I'm kind of proud of is that my music is played all over the world. My royalty statements are like reading a geography book. It's quite amazing, including the Canary Islands, Russia, and one that just came in the other day, which was from Vietnam, which I'm very proud of. That really made me feel good.
Remarkable.
And also, it's nice to know that my music, I mean, I haven't actually worked now for, the last thing I did was in the end of 1999, but I still hear my music on the radio, and it stood the test of time, which makes me very proud.
Well, I always like to give the guest the microphone at the end, really open-ended for anybody who is watching us or tuning in, wherever they are in the world, because as we've established, there's fans of yours from all over this globe.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say to anybody who is tuned in with us?
Keep on listening. And thank you.
Word.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this interview. And thank you to Joanne as well.
You're very welcome. And she says you're very welcome too.
This is a great pleasure.
I read your list of guests, and obviously I'm in some pretty good company.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.
There's some great recording artists in Canada. We love listening to them down here.
Yeah. We have a good bunch here. I'm just reading actually right now. I'm reading Gordon Lightfoot's biography, and he's quite a guy.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of working with him during the early days at the Village Corner, so I know him quite well. And Ian and Sylvia Tyson were very good to me in the early days. I did my first proper concert with them. I opened for them at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and I got an encore.
Nice.
Which was nice. And I wanted to be more of a concert musician and not so much play in the bars and places like that. But and I've appeared in some pretty nice places, and so it's been a good time.
Well, Mr. Wiffen, thank you so much, and I am honored to have done this interview.
Well, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
It's nice to hear.
All right, sir.
Okay, been nice.
The Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by people like you, listeners, viewers. Please go to thepaulleslie.com/ support, and you'll know what to do when you're there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who contributes. Performance of The Entertainer intro song by John Primorano. And of course, this is your announcer speaking. See you next time on the Paul Leslie Hour.